Now it's working.
Christine, you're on.
All right. Well, good night, everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to October. Can you believe it? This year is just flying by. It's another edition of the Robert Lunz Group Sierra Club membership meeting, and we are so glad to have you with us tonight. We have a group that's large and growing. We've got over 1,200 members that are spread over Berkeley, Charleston, Colleton, and Dorchester counties in South Carolina. And just to let you know, the mission of the Sierra Club is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. And we hope that you have had plenty of occasions to do that this year, either locally or nationally or even internationally. And we hope that you get to do that even more in the coming years. All right. So here's a slide with pictures of some of our leadership. I am Christine von Kalnitz. I am the chair of the local group of the Sierra Club. And in the pictures over here, we have people that are enjoying some volunteer activities, tabling, putting some oysters in bags that would later be put out into the harbor, and tabling. We were at an Audubon event there. And I think that some people are on the Zoom right now. I saw Pat and Laura and Star, and I think maybe Yvonne just came in, and Julia and Nina. We have a couple of positions open. Treasurer is one of those positions that's open right now. There's not a lot of work to do in the treasurer position, and we would welcome anyone that has a little bit of time that would like to join our group and take that position, and we would appreciate any help we could get there. All right, we are starting a new campaign, and it's called Ready for 100. We are working with Penny Cothran. Penny is out of Columbia. She works for the National Sierra Club. She is a volunteer working on just this program, Ready for 100, and it's Ready for 100 Clean Energy. Now, what that means is that we want clean energy for the Charleston region, and we are working with Penny to learn how to put together a campaign to do just that. Work with our leaders, work with our community to make sure that we can have good, clean energy in the Charleston region. If you want to help us do that, please get in touch with Penny or myself or anyone on our committee. We will gladly accept your help. What we're doing right now in this campaign is learning skills to have one-on-one conversations with leaders in the local community and other other volunteers potentially that could come on board and help us. So we're learning skills the whole way through this, leadership skills. If you're interested in getting involved, learning leadership skills, working with leaders, and of course, getting us ready for 100% clean energy, come on, we need you. All right, outings. Star, do you want to jump in here and give us some information about these fabulous outings that we have listed?
I will in a second. Let's see. This is so hard.
Now you're muted again. You unmuted and then it somehow muted you.
Okay. How
There
about
you go.
now?
Okay, great.
In November, we'll be going kayaking and camping at Dreher Island State Park. I've always wanted to go up to Dreher Island and paddle around, so I thought, why not make it an outing? So there we go. December 3, 4, 5, we'll be going out to Otter Island. And this is a wilderness camping trip. You have to be an experienced camper and or an experienced kayaker to go on this one, but it'll be probably one of the best places on earth to be at that time. About a little bit later than that, the following weekend, maybe the 12th, there's a Bill Turner paddle on Penny Creek. That takes us through the end of the year. Then we'll be doing a hike on the Swamp Walk passage of the Palmetto Trail on the 8th of January, good 6 mile or so hike. We'll go up and look for birds on January 22nd at Huntington Beach State Park. Great place to be up there. I've always wanted to camp out at Santee Costa Reserve, and February might be the best time of the year to try that. We'll go biking one day and birding another. If you want to come up one day or the other, that'll be just fine. This is primitive camping, so we'll have to talk about that. And then on March 19th, this is one of my annual trips, off-road biking the Lake Moultrie passage of the Palmetto Trail. This is about 30 miles. It's relatively early in the biking year, so you need to be in shape for 30 miles for that time. And there's some other things in here that Bill Turner is going to be doing along the way that I don't have listed right here and don't remember from memory. So there you go. Come out and join us.
Hey, Star, can you remind me, where is Dreher Island State Park?
So Dreher Island State Park is north of Columbia a little ways.
Okay.
It's not as far as Newberry, but it's out of most of the urban crush of Columbia, as far as I know.
Okay.
So the campsites are down by the lake, and it should be easy to get out on the water from there. By the way, if you're going to do this, somebody can join me at the campsite, but otherwise you'll have to get your own camping permit to stay there. That's a problem with doing these state park things.
Right. Okay, so if someone wants to go and just do the kayaking, could they just come and do the kayaking?
Yeah, it'd be a long day drive, but yeah.
Okay.
They could certainly join us up there. That'd be fine. Yeah.
All right.
They'll miss the prosecco and the lobster for Friday night, but they could come up otherwise.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's pretty fancy for camping. All right. I am going to skip this slide for a second because I'm trying to wait on Ben Mack to come in, and I am going to talk about next month's program right now. We will be meeting Thursday, November 4th, the first Thursday of November, 7 p.m. Kendall Brantley, she is a sustainability specialist at the Amplified Ag. She is also a climate ambassador for the city of Charleston. So the city of Charleston, as some of you know, has been working for over a year to create their climate action plan. It was adopted in May of 2021. And Kendall is going to come and give us all the lowdown on the new climate action plan. It's a 5-year strategic plan, and it's a framework to reduce the carbon pollution in the city of Charleston. And if you've seen it, you can see that the city of Charleston, what they did was their carbon as of city operations, but they also measured the carbon of the entire city. So in order for this plan to work, it's not just going to take city operations just reducing their carbon, because their carbon is actually a small portion of the overall carbon of the city of Charleston. It's going to take all of the citizens in the city of Charleston working to reduce their carbon. So we really need to get the word out. We really need to help people get the word out. Please come and listen to Kendall talk about this and bring other people, because it is going to be an all hands on deck operation to reduce the carbon in the city of Charleston. And if you don't live in the city of Charleston, come anyway, because we want you to go back and take this information back to your city or your town and get them to make sure that they're making their own climate action plans, and you could be a part of that. So come on and learn with us and get involved. All right. I believe Ben Mack is in the house. and he is going to tell you about this exciting film that has been created, and we've got a film opening coming up next week.
That's correct. Thanks, Christine. This has been a year-long project by me and my compadre, Marsh Dean. The name of the movie is Rescue Rantals Creek, the movie. And Rantals Creek is about a few miles south of Red Top if you're headed towards Beaufort on US 17. It's an area that's in the crosshairs in terms of urban sprawl for Charleston County. And about a year ago, I went out there with a couple of fellow Lunz group members to Bulow Landing, to the location of where the movie is going to be premiered at 7:30 on October 15th next week, which is Friday. And just fell in love with the place and really hit it off with this videographer and this idea of creating a movie with the help of the Lunz group to generate awareness for the area, specifically it being the place of origin for the Stono Rebellion, which is the largest uprising of enslaved people in colonial history, and the place of first contact between the Edisto Natchez Cusco tribe and colonials. Just want everybody on this call to be a part of the experience, be a part of the story by coming out there and seeing the movie in the place where it was shot. And, after you see the movie, you got to spread the word, you got to share it, and then you got to get out there on the creek and paddle Rantals Creek and see this area, which is just phenomenal. Most of it is rice, dikes, and canals dug by enslaved people that have been overgrown in the past 200 years. Just being out there in the canoe, the silence, with just you and your paddle, maybe your dog, and realizing that people dug these canals hundreds of years ago is overwhelming. And I think you'll realize when you see the movie, it was worth the effort.
It's a fabulous movie. We really thank you, Ben and Marsh, and everyone involved with making it. And we're going to have a great time that night watching this and bringing our picnics and just having a good time chatting before and after the movie. So we look forward to seeing you and look forward to learning more about Rantals Creek and saving that area. There is Poplar Grove on one side of the creek, and right next to Poplar Grove, I don't know if you've heard, but there's another development that could be coming in there. And I think it was the town of Ravenel that was looking to bring in some land into their town, and if they annex this property, they could bring water to that property, that could bring the water over to Poplar Grove. It could just expand the development even more. It's a real threat to the area. And if you've been paying attention at all, this has been an area that has been a struggle for years to protect. And even through all those struggles, tens of thousands of acres have been protected, and we need to keep fighting. So it's been done, land has been protected, and we need to keep it up. So we look forward to seeing you there. All right, we're going to get to tonight's program. We are welcoming Brook Czwartacki. All right. She's a hydrologist with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and she's going to be talking tonight about saltwater intrusion into coastal groundwater. She's originally from Virginia. She completed her undergraduate BS in biology at Shenandoah University and her MS in environmental studies at the College of Charleston. Good local school there. She has been the coastal hydrologist at the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources since 2014. Her work at DNR is focused on groundwater monitoring and groundwater level mapping. So welcome, Brook. And I will stop sharing my slides so that you can.
Thank you.
I'll let everyone know if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And after the presentation, we will be asking Brooke your questions.
All right. I'm just going to move. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction. Yes, my name is Brook Czwartacki, and today I am going to present to you some work that's been done focusing on saltwater intrusion into the coastal aquifer system in South Carolina. So first, what is saltwater intrusion? Saltwater intrusion is just simply the movement of high salinity water into freshwater systems. We can partition this into visible and invisible. So usually when we think about saltwater intrusion, you think about visible that's occurring on land that alters the visual landscape. We've seen brackish and salt marsh migration to places where it didn't used to be, agricultural yield declines where fields become salty, and more recently, coastal forest loss and the creation of ghost forests. This picture is from Wilmington, but there are sections of South Carolina that are experiencing the same thing, and it's a new and growing threat. I'm going to talk about invisible saltwater intrusion, and this would be occurring underground as saltwater migrates and intrudes into fresh groundwater. This happens along a dynamic zone called the freshwater saltwater interface. While visible saltwater intrusion is caused by storm surges, drought, agricultural canals, and sea level rise, this underground intrusion is mainly caused by lowering groundwater levels from pumping. This results in saltwater moving into areas that were previously fresh. So I'm going to give you a little introduction of what the freshwater saltwater phase interface is and salinity intrusion. So this is a natural zone of transition that exists near the seaward edge of aquifers. It's dynamic, meaning that it can fluctuate in response to physical variables. It's characterized by increasing total dissolved solids and increased chloride. The major dissolved ions in seawater are chloride and sodium, and the concentration of chloride in seawater is about 19,000 milligrams per liter. It's a conservative ion in seawater, meaning that it doesn't react or change when it comes into contact with other ions. So we use chloride concentration as a reliable way of measuring salt and identifying saltwater intrusion. The EPA sets a lower limit of 250 milligrams per liter as the target level for contamination of saltwater. It's considered a secondary contaminant. It means it's non-enforceable. It doesn't pose a great health risk, but it does affect aesthetics, mainly taste. So most people can taste saltwater when you get to be about 400 milligrams per liter. And that the big issue is that once it gets into the groundwater matrix, it's difficult to remove. Removing it requires costly treatment. And if the intrusion has become so severe, wells are usually abandoned and alternative water supplies need to be found. So the figure on the right here shows salinity and saltwater intrusion in a really simple way. So less dense freshwater is overlying more dense saltwater. When pumping and extracting groundwater exceeds the rate of freshwater replenishment from recharge, whether that be precipitation or a recharge area, the salty water can be pulled towards production wells. Two that are shown here is lateral intrusion and vertical intrusion. Now I'm going to get a little bit more involved. So there are several mechanisms for saltwater intrusion related to this groundwater extraction. This diagram is really busy, but it is showing a unconfined and a confined aquifer system. An aquifer is defined as a saturated permeable sediment. It's rocks, sand, silt that will yield a useful quantity of water to a well. So the gray area on the top is fresh water. This could be limestone. The tan band in the middle is a confining layer. This is probably clay. And then below in the gray area, this is, also fresh water. The red is indicating salt water. The upper aquifer it's a non-confined aquifer. This could be thought of as the water table. The water is not pressurized. Below the confining layer, the water is pressurized. And so we'd call this an artesian aquifer. So I'm going to talk about the 4 different types of intrusion here. So first, we have lateral intrusion, and that is encroachment of salt water of modern seawater along the base of an aquifer, just kind of like this diagram is showing it before. And you can see, let me get a pointer. There's kind of it comes in at a toe, and it moves inland in response to pumping. The second one is, this is upward intrusion. This is occurring vertically where there is saltier water either in a lower strata that is being pulled up through a confining layer into a freshwater area. This also occurs when there is a well that has been installed and it crosses over multiple strata. There may be salt water at the base of one aquifer, and because your screen is going all the way through a confining layer into an upper aquifer, you're pulling salty water along with it every time you pump. The next one is downward intrusion. So this can happen in coastal waters, estuaries, or marshes that have actually incised and cut into the coastal plain sediments. And so there is a direct conduit for salt water to basically leak down into the groundwater system. Where the confining layer is absent, this can be particularly bad because if the gradients are correct, this can travel quite far. And then finally on this is the movement of residual seawater. So this is ancient seawater that occurred in the aquifer back when the previous sea level high stands during the interglacial periods. So this is really old relic water. And its presence and its movement usually indicate that a aquifer is not well flushed, meaning that the water is not discharging out of it to the ocean. It's just become stuck at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to get specifically into South Carolina now, kind of that I've given you a little bit of a background. So we're considered a water-rich state. We've got plentiful rivers and lakes. We enjoy them, but 99% of South Carolina's water is actually underground. There's an estimated 390,000 billion gallons stored in our coastal plain aquifers. So the coastal plain aquifers, which are shown in this block diagram, are present from the fall line to the coast. And in here, 95% of our groundwater is kept. In the area above the fall line, in the Piedmont and the Blue Ridge provinces, about 5% of the groundwater is stored in fractures in the bedrock. So for those of you who are not well acquainted with the hydrostratigraphy of South Carolina, like me, I'm going to give you a quick overview of this coastal plain system. So this framework is comprised of sediments that are permeable and non-permeable. It kind of looks like a layer cake a bit. At the top here, we have this superficial aquifer. That would be the water table aquifer. And then a clay layer and the upper Floridan aquifer, the middle Floridan aquifer, and the Gordon aquifer. This portion makes up the limestone and sand aquifers that are from the tertiary age. So that means that they are older than 23 million years. Below that, we have the Cretaceous aquifers that are older than 65 million years. That would be the Crouch Branch aquifer, the McQueen Branch aquifer, the Charleston aquifer, and the Grambling aquifer. The Grambling aquifer is very, very deep. It occurs at 3,000 feet deep. And then it is all sitting on top of undifferentiated bedrock. So there's a lot here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on these upper confined aquifers, collectively known as the Floridan aquifer system. And I'm going to highlight work that's been done in Hilton Head and the Low Country because as much as I'd like to talk about all the work that we're doing, I don't have time. And so I'm going to highlight where most of the saltwater intrusion is occurring in South Carolina. So the Florida Aquifer System, it's a huge, vast system, and it covers approximately 100,000 square miles. It is complex. It's made of permeable carbonate rocks, limestone, and then in these up-dip areas, there's limestone and non-carbonate rocks. So maybe broken up rocks, sandstones, things that contain silica. It's very productive. It produces a ton of water, and it's a very important source of water for millions of people. Its setting, though, being close to the coast and being at low elevation, makes it very susceptible to saltwater intrusion. Saltwater intrusion has occurred all in Florida, in Georgia, and you're going to see in South Carolina as well. The reason why is because there are areas that are unconfined and semi-confined, where water readily leaks down into it. If you think about Florida, think about sinkholes and karst systems, and this is the same aquifer that produces, same type of geology that produces these systems. So only a small portion of this aquifer is in South Carolina, but it's still a really important water source. Because the water is found at a relatively shallow depth, usually less than 200 feet, these wells are really common in both Hilton Head and then outside of Hilton Head in the rural areas of Charleston County, Colleton County, Berkeley County, Dorchester County. But almost all of the areas that are close to the coast have experienced some type of saltwater intrusion or decline in water quality from overpumping. So other names for this aquifer locally, maybe that you could be familiar with, would include the Santee limestone or the Black Mingo aquifer or the tertiary sand, but those names are becoming outdated. Okay, so let's take a look at the Florida aquifer prior to development. This is just the portion in South Carolina, and this is called a potentiometric surface map. This is one of the things that I create in my position. Potentiometric surface map is a contour map that's referenced to a vertical datum. Used to be mean sea level, but now we use the vertical datum of 1988 to show the elevation at which water stands in tightly cased wells. So these wells are completed in this confined aquifer. And if you are to collect a water level measurement from these wells, this potentiometric surface is the imaginary surface as to where the water would rise in the well. So this map right here is representing the conditions prior to 1880s, where before groundwater development was a thing here in Charleston, here in South Carolina. So generally water flows from high to low, and a general rule is that water flows perpendicular to contour lines. So we have water discharging from the northwest to the southeast, somewhere off the ocean, because this aquifer actually outcrops at some distance off the ocean that we don't actually know. We make these maps every year. We've been doing it for years, and they can show changes in groundwater storage, and they can determine regional flow gradients. They're also very useful for directing saltwater intrusion studies as they relate to withdrawal. One thing that I want to note on this map before I move on is that this is a 25-foot contour line. That means that the water in the aquifer is at 25 feet right there. So that means that some of these wells might very well be flowing in artesian conditions over land. Okay, so here is a second map of the potentiometric surface. This was collected in 2016. We use over 100 wells to create these maps in the fall. And there's a few differences, obviously, that you can see just by thinking about the other map. These contour lines are steeper, and they've also curled around to shift to these lower areas. Now there's the 25 line would probably be somewhere out in here. We have negative pressure along the coast and here along at Savannah. So what happens from pumping as long-term can result in cones of depression or areas of dewatering where the groundwater levels have declined. So the greatest declines are centered at the pumping centers, but this zone of influence can spread out for tens of miles, which is what I'm going to demonstrate down here. We're going to look at the pumping in Hilton Head and Savannah, Georgia for the first part of my talk. So here's a closer view of the South Carolina-Georgia border. This is, again, prior to development, so 1880. Water flowed in this region from the southwest towards the to the east, to the northeast, and it discharged offshore or discharged kind of in this zone right here at the Port Royal Sound. Beginning in the 1880s, Savannah started pumping 7 million gallons a day. They increased their pumping up to 88 million gallons a day when all said and done by 1998. Hilton Head, centered here, started withdrawing water in the 1950s. At their maximum, they were withdrawing 14.5 million gallons a day in 1998. So what occurred several years before this picture here, but the gradient switched and it reversed the natural gradient and it all started to move towards the pumping center. This is a very 100 feet below land surface, and it is a cone of dewatering that spread out across the landscape. So on the right, this we can see, here's that potentiometric surface. This is showing that it's a flowing well onto the surface, and then pumping caused this water pressure to drop. Now, not only did the water pressure drop, it started to pull salt water down into the aquifer. So we have a direct conduit of the Atlantic Ocean and the other, it says the Calaveras Sound, pulling fresh water, salty water down into an aquifer that previously was fresh. Okay, so this next set of slides, I was excited to see these. This is from a very recently published report by the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control's Bureau of Water. So the report details a really extensive history of groundwater use and subsequent saltwater intrusion in the Port Royal and Hilton Head area. They've used a combination of historical and modern water day quality to identify 11 plumes that have been intruding on the water supply in southern Beaufort County. So in this map here, and I'm going to share several of these maps, they're all the same. This scale is salt in milligrams per liter. If you remember earlier, I said that 250 is the dividing line where the EPA says that the water has been contaminated, going all the way up to about seawater. So this is these are simulated from data that was either found in historical files or data that was collected from wells. Some of the data were pumped and sent to labs for direct chloride measurements, and then some of the well data were measured indirectly using probes that measure specific conductance, which is a measure of the ability of water to conduct electricity. And there is a direct relationship between specific conductance and chloride. It's been well established, and so it's a reliable way to estimate chloride pretty cheaply. So these model results, it was a coupled model, it used Monflow and Sutra to simulate groundwater pumping conditions and the movement of the salt water from pre-development all the way to 2050. So the first one I'm going to show you here is a pre-development plume. This plume may have always been here. This may be ancient seawater that was stuck at the bottom of the aquifer during those high stands and low stands when the aquifers were laid down. There is no confining layer right here, actually. But what I want to focus on is this red square right here, because this is the This is called the Dolphin Head Plume, and this may be the source for most of the contamination that has traveled and moved on to Hilton Head Island. Also, I want to point out that there is a well right here, it's Beaufort 315, that has been used as a harbinger for what was to come. Okay, so now we're in 1977, and this is the simulated saltwater in the upper Florida aquifer. About the same time that this map was drawn, or that this map is simulated, this water well right here exceeded 250 milligrams per liter of chloride. This is about 1980. So this meant that the plume had reached the island, and then all of the supply wells that were on Hilton Head were in danger of intrusion. So this prompted action from the regulatory state agency. That agency was the South Carolina Water Resources Commission. They're now defunct. They are South Carolina DHEC. But in 1981, they declared this area a capacity use area, meaning that groundwater withdrawals would be regulated. And this was in a direct response to withdrawals from Savannah and the growth in the Beaufort area at the threat of upcoming saltwater intrusion. Okay, so now here we are in 1998. And this map shows that 11 separate plumes have been identified from the work that DHEC did out of this study. I still only want to focus on this specific one right here, where we continue to see this salt front of the 250 milligrams per liter move across the island. So in an effort to slow the water, withdrawals from the upper Florida aquifer were capped at 9.5 million gallons a day. But the intrusion had already been set in place, and so it kept marching across. Hilton Head Public Service District is the water supply there, and they began supplementing their supply with purchased water from the Savannah River from Beaufort Jasper Water Sewer Authority. And that's expensive. But even though they started purchasing water and using additional sources, they started losing additional wells beginning in the year 2000. This is the 2007 map showing the locations of the plume. So it has increased. So in response to this, in response to more saltwater intrusion, in 2009, Hilton Head tapped the deeper middle Florida aquifer. This aquifer is a little bit brackish, and they used it to source water to feed a reverse osmosis plant where they were running the water through multiple filters to remove salt. Then, in another effort in 2011, they drilled a well, an aquifer storage and recovery well, in which water is injected into the well to use for storage. They injected fresh treated water to make a freshwater bubble to store, and then they could pull it out when the water from Beaufort Jasper became too expensive, or when the demand was increased during the summer. So here we are at the simulated 2050 position. So we aren't here yet, but from this map, it looks like that all of the freshwater resources are likely imperiled on Hilton Head Island. This model doesn't paint a pretty picture, and even if all the pumping was to stop, these plumes would still be migrating towards Savannah over the next 50 to 70 years. So the options may be limited and costly, and finding an alternative supply, reverse osmosis, purchasing wholesale water, and might be potential long-term solutions. I know I threw a lot of information at you just then, so I kind of want to back up and talk about what Hilton Head has been doing to mitigate and manage their saltwater intrusion. So first, conjunctive water use means using surface and groundwater resources. They started doing this from the Savannah River in 1999, and they currently purchase this water from the mainland to supplement their source. Aquifer storage and recovery. This is not only used in Hilton Head. Aquifer storage and recovery is used in other parts of the state, especially in the Myrtle Beach area. for a separate reason, but you inject treated water into an aquifer for future use. So this is treated surface water is injected into the middle Floridan aquifer and used during months of increased demand. And then even to protect water, because in the Beaufort and inland areas, Beaufort Jasper is treating surface water and pumping it into the upper Floridan aquifer for use. They don't have as much intrusion or very little intrusion occurring in that region at the time, but I think they're using this as a stopgap to try to prevent it from intruding more. Reverse osmosis, it is a process that uses membranes to remove salts. This is also very common. Mount Pleasant uses reverse osmosis. They are using it for a different reason and pulling it from a different aquifer. But this is a very expensive way, but a very effective way to remove salt from water. It's basically desalinization. And then water use and reclamation, not used for water supply so much, but treated wastewater is used for irrigation. And reclaimed water they use to irrigate common areas and subdivisions, residential properties, golf courses, and to add recharge into wetlands. So I've described work that's been done, and it produced a model. They say that all models are wrong. Some are just better than others, but we'll continue to collect data and hopefully feed it into that model to improve the model, because we're still a ways off from 2050, but we're still collecting data. But we do have another way of tracking saltwater intrusion, and we do that by using real-time data. We use strategically placed dedicated monitoring wells, and they're they have equipment to monitor and track changes in specific conductance. Currently in South Carolina, we have 14 monitoring sites. This map here is kind of a combination of the South Carolina Saltwater Intrusion Monitoring Network, which is what SCDNR manages, and a couple wells down here in Beaufort County that USGS manages. So our network spans 5 coastal counties. Some of these wells were drilled specifically for monitoring saltwater intrusion, and the others were existing wells that were in a location that actually proved useful. So most of our wells in the network are tapped into the uppermost confined aquifer. So down in the Beaufort area, that would be the upper Floridan and the middle Floridan. Moving up to the coast, because there is no upper Floridan and middle Floridan, we have the Gordon aquifer, that would be the extended Floridan. And then moving even farther up, where the tertiary sediments are eroded away, our first combined aquifers are the Cretaceous aquifers. Many of our wells only have about a 10-year record, but most of our wells came on in 2014. We recently drilled this well right here in Colleton in 2020, and we've just acquired a well at the DNR Fort Johnson campus that we're planning to instrument. So these wells have a water level probe and a specific conductivity probe. Here's a picture of the well at Santee Coastal Reserve. It's a beautiful site when the flies don't carry away. And those are suspended in the well, and they are collecting data at a 1-hour interval. So we have been using a combination of this real-time data, and then we occasionally go and pump these wells to collect a real chloride sample. That helps us build a relationship between the two variables, and so that we can use our data and convert it to chloride concentration with some confidence. We're seeing different trends along the coast, and we've identified minor intrusion occurring in this area here, which we believe is in relation to pumping. And then, but that source of seawater is likely ancient seawater that is trapped, that is moving, because these aquifers are pretty deep. So I'm going to zoom back down to Hilton Head. I'm going to show you some real-time data. This is the USGS gauge. This is located at that same location that old that old public supply well was that got saltwater intrusion. These data are available on the internet, and this spans from 2008 to 2021, and it is measuring specific conductance. And you can see a really, really strong increase. Over this 13-year period of time, there has been 1,960 milligrams per liter of increase. That's an increase of approximately 150 milligrams a year. So this location's already experienced saltwater intrusion, and there's not much that we can do. We're just going to watch it get saltier and saltier until it eventually it is like seawater. So we facilitated this year to add an additional well here at Czwartacki Island. This record just began in August, so we can't make any conclusions. This record showing a slight increase may just be a seasonal signal, but it is about a little under 500 milligrams per liter. So there is likely some intrusion that has already occurred at Czwartacki Island. But if you're interested in tracking these, you can look them up on the USGS website. Okay, now I'm going to zoom back up to the kind of the Charleston area, and I'm going to show you some of the data that we're collecting. These hydrographs represent our continuous water level and chloride trends. So this is in the Gordon Aquifer. This well right here on the left is located at the College of Charleston Stono Preserve in Hollywood. It's in the Gordon Aquifer. It's 500 feet deep about. There's a long-term decline in water level here this is just a period of 6 years. I've got estimated chloride on this axis and water level on this axis. We're not seeing a lot of change. We do see that there's an inverse relationship between water level and chlorides. I did say that this was kind of a dynamic system. So when the water level goes up, the chlorides go down. Then over here on the right, this well is located at Santee Coastal Reserve. It is shallower and somewhat unconfined. It's 113 feet. We think that this well this location is pretty well connected to the Santee River. What you can see in here is a mediated water table or hydrograph from the tides. And you can even see some of our huge weather events that occurred. And we'll see a freshening, a very sharp drop. This was probably Matthew. This was, I don't know what that was. But we are seeing a slight increase in chloride over time at this location. Now at this part, this may be a different process going here because we don't have any pumping going on in this area, and we may have a similar situation like Hilton Head, but because there's no pumping, the risk for saltwater intrusion like we've seen at Hilton Head is not very likely. Our monitoring network is relatively new, so it's actually difficult and not appropriate to make conclusions. So we're going to keep measuring. Just to summarize what I just talked about, saltwater intrusion in South Carolina is driven by groundwater development. The Upper Florida Aquifer and Hilton Head is experiencing saltwater intrusion at a rate of about 288 feet per year. That figure was derived from that Dolphin Head plume. The causes are downward migration of modern seawater. We have leaky confining layers. There's downward movement of water from the basins and movement of ancient seawater, all contributing to that area. The DNR and the USGS collect real-time data tracking saltwater intrusion. We're going to continue to expand that network so that we can gather more information, and we'll continue pumping our wells so that we can build better relationships, so we can have more confidence in releasing those data to the public. We've also done some Cretaceous aquifer studies. We recently completed a study on the Charleston Aquifer in Charleston, and I wish I had had time to talk about that. But we have a current study on the Crouch Branch Aquifer in Georgetown and Horry counties. The data for the information on those aquifers was very old, and we're looking at water quality on a regional scale. So if you're thirsty for more, you can check out our website. Please do. We also participate in the National Groundwater Monitoring Network, which is a clearinghouse for water level and water quality information. This is just South Carolina, but I think 23 states participate in it. Also, if you are interested in reading the groundwater report, the history alone in it is very interesting from DHEC. It's available at this link. And that's all I have. Thank you very much for your time.
Great job, Brooke. That was a very difficult subject, and you made it where we could understand it.
I went a little over time, but I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
Fabulous job. So we do have some questions.
Great.
I want to get right to them. All right.
I want to see the people.
Yeah. Does the rainfall recharge the Floridian aquifer?
Yes, in some cases. So in locations where the aquifer is unconfined, rainfall can recharge the aquifer. The recharge that occurs close to the coast may be very minimal, but in those updip areas, especially in let's say Barnwell, Aiken, Dorchester, and like Eastern Berkeley, in the areas where it's unconfined, those are the recharge areas. Now it takes a long time for the water to reach the coast. What you're seeing a huge delay, but that is one of the primary rechargers of the Floridan aquifer.
So when we get rain inland, that's a good thing.
And after a while, yes.
Takes a while.
It takes a while. It definitely takes a while. And I mean, rain is not going to affect so much the water levels that we're seeing close to the coast, like the water levels in Charleston, just because it is so deep. The aquifer starts at approximately 180 feet below ground and extends down to 500 in some of those ranges. And so it takes a long time for that water to percolate down.
Okay. So if you have a well in your yard and you're irrigating your lawn, is the water just going right back down to the aquifer?
The water that you're irrigating your lawn to, when it doesn't run off or it doesn't evaporate, is recharging the water table aquifer. So in the water table aquifer is that first saturated portion below the soil layer. You dig a hole in your yard, you'll eventually get down to some depth, and you'll start having water filled in. So that is the immediate result of watering your lawn and the infiltration. The water table aquifer in kind of in our area here in the Charleston area can go down to about 50 feet and before you have a major confining layer. And so that volume of water can be available to water yards, and then it will recharge. But we do, there are evaporative processes that will draw it out. So if we have drought, we have a lot of solar radiation, the trees are going to drink up more, and so that water table can fluctuate.
Okay, so most of the shallow wells that are dug for residential homes, how far do those go? How deep are those mostly?
In the Charleston area, in Berkeley, Dorchester, if you have an irrigation well in your yard, it might be between 30 and 60 feet deep. And that would be a shallow well. They can go dry if there is a lot of pumping going on in a certain area, or we're experiencing very dry conditions. We can see water that these irrigation wells go dry. Now in say Colleton County, in Dorchester County, kind of the rural areas, a lot of those wells are actually tapped into the Floridan aquifer because the Florida aquifer is only about 100 feet deep, up to a depth of 100 feet. And so there's so much water in there that you're getting enough water to be able to support a household. You could take a shower, run the dishwasher, and wash your laundry or something.
Okay. So for the residential, still sticking with that for a
Okay.
minute, does the reduction of that demand, does it have, if all of those wells were cut off, would it have any impact on the saltwater intrusion or the significant use of groundwater?
Are you talking about like in the Hilton Head area?
Well, anywhere.
Well, so in the Hilton Head area, I'll just say that quickly. Because the groundwater, the regional groundwater level gradients have shifted, that is going to just keep marching along. Something is going to drastically have to change for those gradients to shift. But in other cases, the saltwater, the zone of transition is dynamic. It can fluctuate from rain, drought, tide, and different forces. So if in other cases, maybe like in Charleston, when we have higher water levels, it's a pressure differential. The pressure is higher, and so the chlorides will drop. When saltwater intrusion does occur, though, it is very difficult to get out. And even so, thinking about surface flooding. So let's say we have a large storm surge and it covers your area with salt water, and then that salt water infiltrates down. That is where we have the risk of saltwater intrusion affecting, that visual landscape, tree loss, crop dying. I don't know if that answered your question.
Right. So if you're in the Charleston area, where can you go to find this information like you have for the Hilton Head area?
We don't have the information. That's the problem. Okay. So the information for the Charleston area is because saltwater intrusion hasn't been as much of an issue, the data just aren't there. There was a study done in 1985 by a hydrologist at DNR, and it covered the Tri-County area, and lots of wells. I can't remember how many wells were pumped for chloride, and some chloride contours were developed. We went out in 2016 and 2018 and tried to replicate that study. Well, nothing has changed. That's a good thing. So we have good water supply, but it also says to me that it's not a major water source here in the Charleston area. People that live in Charleston, for the majority, get their water from the Charleston water system that's pulling from the Bushy Park Reservoir. And so, and the same with Berkeley County. Mount Pleasant is different because they get their water from the Charleston aquifer. That aquifer is 2,000 feet deep. We've recently finished a study on that aquifer, and we found that the saltwater intrusion is occurring in very, very localized areas, but we don't want to make any conclusions about where it's going because we don't have sufficient historical data to indicate that that salt wasn't there to begin with. And so the more that we rely on these surface water sources, which it appears that we do, that our groundwater sources do appear to be protected in somewhat.
So that gets to one of the other questions that someone asked, and that was, you have this data from 1880. How do you have that data?
There are old accounts of data. We have the data because it's in reports. Okay. There were accounts of water systems and individuals or well users that did record information about the quality and the quantity of the water that they had. For instance, in the DHEC report that I was using in my presentation, there's a huge section on the water development in Paris Island that took place in 1906. And from 1880s, there were superintendent reports from when Savannah started extracting their water. Similarly, in the Charleston area, we have the old well records from 1890 when the initial deep well was drilled that is underground in downtown Charleston.
Very cool.
So the records are there. They were just compiled before me.
For us.
Before us, and put into reports that we were able to use.
Okay. So here's an interesting question. So who decides injection to pumping rates?
Who
Who makes the decision to do that?
So we do not. So DNR is not a regulatory agency. We collect data and we inform the regulatory agency, which is DHEC. And so any kind of pumping restrictions or capped any type of restrictions placed on how much water can be withdrawn is governed by DHEC. DHEC has several capacity use areas within the state. There are six of them. They're creating one right now called the Santee Lynches. The Low Country and the Trident were created back in the 1980s, where groundwater withdrawal is regulated. If you are a user and you pump more than 3 million gallons a month, you have to have a permit to pull, and then you're required to report your information to DHEC. DHEC keeps track of that, and they will set the guidelines as to how much water you can withdraw based upon the data that is provided from the individual users and our maps to say how much water can be pulled from an aquifer that would not harm the aquifer, because the ultimate goal of regulation is to do no harm, yet still provide a service.
And yet we're still doing harm in the Hilton Head area. So
Yes, yeah.
I'm just saying. So, how much does a monitoring well cost to drill?
$50,000.
Ooh.
Yeah, they're not cheap. So, it's a very messy process as well. The one that we recently drilled in Colleton County was a little bit cheaper, but the going rate is about $50,000. We always make an effort to try to find wells that were previously used as water supply wells or for other uses that we can examine and adopt and make our own, so that we can add to our network at a low cost, because we don't have a lot of money. And if we're going to drill wells, we usually need to obtain grant funds to do so.
Well, it sounds like the communities would want to pay for that.
Would they?
Well, I would think so. So, it sounds like you're doing us a favor. So when will the intrusion rates in Hilton Head be reflected in the real estate prices?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, possibly never. What I don't have a good grasp of, and even from reading the reports and knowledge is what are they going to do when all of the wells are intruded? I mean, that if they completely get off of the well water and become reliant on the Savannah River, then what are the impacts from that? So it's kind of a fluid situation that needs to be tracked, and so that's why it's really important to have these types of monitoring networks. And the report that I described, it was a report, it was done, it's finished, but the work needs to continue. to track and monitor if, is that really happening at the rate, or can it be slowed? And then what other kinds of strategies, can they do to provide water? And reverse osmosis is probably a very likely candidate, but it's very, very expensive. It is very effective, but that cost will probably be passed on to customers eventually. And I think, one of the things that I didn't discuss is, this is inequity of the water in rural areas. So I'm kind of like moving back up, maybe Colleton or these areas where people don't have the option to tie into a municipal water system, and they've got to use common filtration systems, or just drink water that is not of a high quality. And so that's an issue for small communities feeling the stress of declining water quality across South Carolina. And that includes areas in Horry County where the water's not great up there for other reasons.
So if an area is concerned about their water table, and they're also concerned about things like, things that affect that water table. So we've got climate change coming around.
Mm-hmm.
Is anyone monitoring? I know that climate change is going to affect people where, some places are going to have more water and some places are going to have less water. Do we know enough to know what's coming to help recharge these underground water aquifers from climate? It's just, I'm botching this question, but
That's okay.
Climate change is going to affect this. How is it going to affect it? And is anybody paying attention to that?
That's kind of a hard, I think that's kind of a hard question.
It's a hard question to say.
It's a hard question to say. So, we appear in our region of the world, the way that we're being affected appears that we're becoming wetter and warmer. And so being wetter is, a good thing for the aquifers, because that would replenish the aquifers. But then we also have, on the other end is, climate change and sea level rise. So we're getting pinned in. So those areas that we were and where we were extracting water could eventually be underwater. It's a little gloomy and doomy in a way, but for the residential person, what you can do is conserve water. Don't water your yard in the high sun, and practice good water conservation. And education. I think that is something really important. Clemson Extension has a really good service that they've just started for private well owners, and it is a extension service where people can have their water tested for total dissolved solids, iron, I believe, and a couple other things. But it's a service, and so that it's education so that people understand more about their water. And I can provide information about that if anyone is interested. It's a free service.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know I put it on my garden, and I always wonder, how is it affecting the health of the plants in the garden? So you mentioned sea level rise.
I did.
So we've definitely got that happening in the Charleston area, and of course in Hilton Head. When that comes in, is that part of what's going on in Hilton Head? And is that part of what's beginning to happen in the Charleston area? Is that affecting all of these aquifers?
So we don't have a good, I don't have a good answer for that because we don't know. I don't think that we're collecting the data that answers that question. Most of the saltwater intrusion that is occurring, the majority of it is being caused from lower water pressure. But in the cases where I was talking about that the aquifer is unconfined, or you have a lot of contact with estuaries and marshes and land area, that's where the risk of downward filtration is increased. And so if we have larger tides, storm surge, sea level rise, we're wetter in areas that we weren't before, and those areas are inundated with salt water, that water can downwardly infiltrate into the aquifer systems. I don't believe that that is happening in the Charleston area because our confined aquifers are so deep, but it could be happening in the Beaufort area, but it's probably only a minor portion of the overall picture. That, as I said, kind of like that's more of the visible intrusion that we see. These ghost forests when we have a storm surge event, and then we have infiltration of the salt water, and then we have a drought, and that salt water starts to rise up and gets in the trees, and then it's a quick death. Or we have a constraining of these forest areas where salt water and brackish environments are moving in and pushing these freshwater environments farther and farther inland. So I think that that's where sea level rise is coming in. It is affecting agricultural yields. We see this in North Carolina, especially. Our geology is a little bit different than North Carolina, especially with the way that they have the Pamlico Sound out in front of them. But I think that it could happen, but we're just not. For the case of saltwater intrusion on the regional level, we're not measuring it in that sort of way.
Yeah, that does get to another question that someone had asked about, does saltwater intrusion into the aquifers have significant impacts on flora and fauna?
Only to the water table aquifer, yeah.
Okay, all right. And someone was wondering about the Google complex. You know, they're taking a lot of water. How is that
I knew I was
going on there?
I knew I was going to get a Google question.
You knew it. You knew it.
Yeah, I knew. So the Google, I have not been able to see what Google withdrew last year because the report has not been released yet. But it's a minor risk. Google is located so far inland, and they're pulling from the deep aquifer that we have measured saltwater intrusion and measured chloride levels just this past year and compared them to some historical measurements. And we're not seeing significant impacts of saltwater intrusion in that aquifer. And it just may be that it's an extremely productive, very large aquifer, the Charleston aquifer, this one that's at approximately 2,000 feet deep. That's the same aquifer that the Google's in. They're pretty far up dip. If they were to withdraw what they have permitted, which they probably won't, I don't have that number off the top of my head, the impacts won't be seen for a long time. And they already did get a pipe from Berkeley County water to utilize fresh water as well. And so I don't think that we would see impacts anytime soon from water withdrawals that far inland. We would have to worry about what Mount Pleasant was doing, or what some of this, the barrier islands like Sullivan's, our Isle of Palms was doing before we need to worry about what Google's pulling out. But right now we're not seeing any impacts, even with the water use that Mount Pleasant is using, because that's where we would see it first. But we're watching it, we're aware, it's, yeah.
What's a worst case scenario? And has any town already reached it?
Yes, so worst case scenario would be that all the wells salt over and that all wells need to be abandoned. To my knowledge, maybe the town of Beaufort maybe one of the only places that where the wells are gone. I think all of the wells in the upper Florida salted up in about the 40s there. That's probably happening in Hilton Head. So in locations down farther in Florida, in Miami-Dade area, I mean, they've seen that type of intrusion where whole areas just cannot be used as a source anymore because the salinities have gotten to be really, really high.
All right, so I guess my last question with that is, so they've reached their maximum, they're still going strong, they're still growing towns, but it just costs more.
Money.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I don't remember hearing much about, when I was in Beaufort, I saw green lawns, and people are still not, as conservative as you would think they would be. So yeah, interesting.
Well, so they made, so I mean, it happened, this abandonment of the wells and Beaufort and in Paris Island happened so long ago that it's been forgotten, and that there's an alternative water source, and it's not a thing anymore. But with the appropriate amount of and enough money, I think that people have the illusion that their water problems can be solved. And I mean, there's a lot. I mean, Hilton Head is a resort town, golf courses, and so any kind of strategies that they can use to conserve water but still manage to be the sparkling resort town that they want to be is just, I feel like the cost of doing business for them. It's not a pleasant thing to say, but
Right. So I guess, just like with other issues, it becomes a social issue at the end of the day, and those that can afford it do, and those that can't don't. It's very difficult. So we do want to get the link for Clemson that you mentioned.
Sure. Yeah, I can find that.
Okay, great. And we want to put that in our next newsletter. And
I'm sure that they would be really excited to have some additional participants. The program just got started when the pandemic hit, and so they weren't even able to have any of their workshops. So if they could get some interested folks that are want the information and want to ask questions and be involved, I'm sure that they would just be very overjoyed.
Oh yeah, we'd love to get the word out. I would do it in my own yard. Brooke, thank you so much. This has just been fabulous. Thank you for answering all our questions.
Sure.
Thank you to everyone who has joined tonight. Star, thank you for all your great questions, and everyone else for all your great questions. We will be right back here next month, but before next month, don't forget to come on out to Bulow Landing and join us next Friday night for the film opening for Rescue Rantills Creek, and join us, volunteer with us. We've got Ready for 100 campaign going on. We encourage everyone to come on out. This has been fabulous again, Brooke.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was fun to share information with you.
You did a great job. Great job. Great. So hope everyone has a great night. Thank you for coming.
All right, let's get out of here.
All right.
All right.